Good afternoon, National Museum of American History and Smithsonian colleagues, and welcome to the Smithsonian Staff Learning Series hosted by the National Museum of American History. The goal of the series is to explore the trends, topics, and research relating to the public so that we may better understand our current and future audiences. My name is Adam Rozan. I'm the Director of Programs Audience Development at the National Museum of American History and your host and moderator for the series. For today's talk, we'll be exploring insights from Nielsen on Asian American representation in the media, the demographics buying power, influence, and other research from their Insights series, and information gleaned from their recent reports, including their newly published report, Seen, Heard, Valued, Engaging Asian Americans Through Media. We're joined today by Patricia Pat Ratulani, Nielsen's Vice President for Global Communications, Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion. Pat is responsible for Nielsen's Insights project series that focuses on diverse audiences in overseas projects, such as their Diverse Intelligence series. She's a storyteller, bringing to life Nielsen's corporate narrative to engage diverse communities worldwide and using Nielsen's data to amplify underrepresented voices. Over 20 years of corporate communications experience, Pat supports executives and teams with communication strategies to engage internal and external stakeholders. She works with the Nielsen Foundation, the External Advisory Council, and the internal business resource groups to extend their community outreach. Please note that this discussion is being recorded with closed captioning, and I'll be helping our speaker by moderating the chat, so please add your questions there. And I also hope that you will join us tomorrow as well for a talk with Allison Friedman-Krause of the National Institute for Early Education Research at 2 p.m. Eastern Standard Time on Zoom. And lastly, I'd like to hear from you. Please take a moment today or tomorrow and share your thoughts on the series, past speakers, and your future ideas. I'd like to hear from you, so please do that, and thank you. And with that said, I'd like to introduce you to Pat. Pat, the floor is yours. Pat, you're muted. I'm gonna ask you to unmute.
Oh, sorry.
No, there you
I
go.
start all over again. Thank you so much, Adam, for that wonderful intro. And it's so nice to hear all the work that you're doing, the Institute's doing, and the museum is doing to try to make sure that there's a deep understanding within the people who are behind the scenes over there about the consumers, about the population that we're all working together to represent and showcase. And it's May the 2nd, which is the second day of our Asia Pacific American Heritage Month. So happy Heritage Month to all of us. So as Adam mentioned, you see here on the screen in front of you, just confirming, Adam, it's okay, it's displaying, everybody can see it, yes? Okay. This is our most recent report that we just released last week. We provide a diverse intelligence series from Nielsen annually that focuses on multiple diverse identity groups. Primarily, we started with Asian, Black, as well as Hispanic, but we've now expanded that to include some more short articles that cover other identity groups like Native Americans, as well as the LGBTQ audience and people with disabilities. So stay tuned and keep your focus on some of these insights that we're about to share today, and you'll be able to see more of these on our website. So oops, try to advance here. So just to start out, I'm going to just give a bit of a background in terms of where our Asian Americans are and what they're like within the consumer base. So the majority of the folks in Asia who are Asian Americans here today are Chinese, South Asian, Indian, and Filipino. And you can see the breakdown of what that looks like and where they come from in the world. Not surprisingly, China and India have been the first and second sources of US immigration. In the last decade or so, there's been a tremendous growth, particularly into the tech sector, as well as for education purposes. And then if you try to dig deeper into I'm sorry, my computer's going crazy. Where are the Asian Americans once they come and grow within the US? Where's the fastest growth areas? I think we're all used to the traditional growth centers of being on the bi-coastal areas of New York as well as California. But when we took a look in the US Census in 2020, you'll see that there's more of this growth that's going on in kind of the Midwest region, right? And a lot of these were apparently coming from companies that were coming in, Asian companies like the car manufacturers who were coming in, setting up operations within these areas. I mean, that's not all they are, but there's a lot of those companies who are moving into these areas where there's more land, there is more space to bring in workers, to bring in, even the executive teams who are helping to run these places. So, and, so it's not just no longer the Asian American from California or the Asian American from New York, right? As the little blue box here says, culture is no longer a one-word answer. You can't just say I'm Chinese or I'm Korean or I'm Vietnamese. I mean, I'm an example of that, right? I'm Chinese ethnically, but I grew up in Singapore. I was born in Indonesia and I live in Chicago. So what's that make me? A salad, I guess. But it just makes for a very interesting evolution of the cultures that come and are described as Asian American. Now, there are a total of about 26 million of us, and we make up almost 8% of the total population. And interestingly, too, as I had laid out for you earlier, there's a big part of the population that are immigrants, right? And more than half of our population is born outside of the US. And I think this is the two little heads that you see on the right here is something you probably have heard a lot about, and about multi-generational households. And indeed, in the US, many Asian American households are made up of almost three people compared to the 2.5 people. And typically that means we interpret that to be like 2 adults and 1 child in the average household. So there's an evolution as well of that. I think culturally, I can speak to this a lot. I've got a father who is, turning 82. He's still sitting out in Indonesia, and I'm very concerned about that. And I'm ready to move him here, right? But hey, no, the question from a cultural standpoint is always the respect, right? We are expected, but at the same time, we need to also respect what the desires and the wishes are of our the older people in our family, our parents, our grandparents. And the importance of keeping that core of the family is definitely in play all the time as we're making difficult decisions about migration, immigration, and changing the way we live, even as adults today. Now I want to shift a little bit in terms of the power of the Asian American population here. So we are the fastest growing ethnic group within the country compared to Hispanics, Blacks. Over the last 5 years, it's grown by 13%. And importantly, what does it mean in terms of our buying power, right? The immigration, the growth of the population is also coming with a tremendous growth in buying power. It's grown by 127% over the last decade. And our buying power today is 1.4 trillion and is projected to grow to 1.9 in just 3 years. And this is the fastest growth as well among all the other populations in terms of buying power. So just think about what that means from an influence standpoint, right? Whether it comes to, if you're a marketer, what products you can put out on the shelves, what exhibits you're going to put out next in your museums, what kind of programming you're going to put out when it comes to your social media platforms, or the partnership you're going to do with community advocacy organizations, and where you're going to make sure that you've got those community partnerships. And then alongside that, similar to what we saw with the areas of population growth, look at where the states are when it comes to the fastest growth of buying power for Asians. These are the top areas for growth, and they're all triple digits, right? Super fast growing. And again, when we dug a little deeper into this, they're either coming from tech sector or a lot of these auto manufacturers. But in addition, there's also a lot of focus on making sure that there are people tapping into education, people tapping into community areas where they are coming in to have more space for that multi-generational living. So something to be considered when it comes to looking at where to focus on your next growth area. There is definitely an expansion of where populations are moving out to, right? It's no longer just the first cities of New York and LA or San Francisco, right? The second cities like Chicago, but then also, the smaller towns like in North Carolina or Atlanta in Georgia, in Texas also is another big area. I know that when it comes to Asian Americans, right, especially those who are immigrants, weather is a big factor. I'm not, all kidding aside, right? You can see there's very, very few people in Florida because we're all afraid of hurricanes, but Texas is still a pretty big, fast growing state for us. So think about the fast growth in population, the fast growth in buying power, and what it means in terms of the influence of the Asian American population in society, in business, and in culture today. So I'm going to start with business here, right? There's definitely a big push towards placing more Asian Americans in the big American corporations today in terms of diversity, because many companies are saying, hey, D&I is important. We need to make sure that it starts from the top. We need to make sure that when we go out in front of the press, or when we go out in front of our shareholders, we are showing up diverse. And in the last 2 years, ever since the increase in anti-Asian crimes have happened, that's been another big area of growth. But it's always been the case that there's been a big growth of leadership within the digital space. So all these logos that you see up here have executive leaders who are Asian or identify as Asian. And the other thing to note is that right now, Nielsen, we provide measurement for audiences in order for companies to buy ad time, right? So right now we're getting into the new fronts or ad fronts, which is the period where the different networks, streaming platforms and so forth go out there to pitch like, hey, we've got this great show coming up with this type of talent. This is how much it's going to cost you to place an ad with us. So YouTube, which is the one that you see listed as an example right on the left, YouTube is actually shifting the focus to on video shorts. So there are influencers out there who are creating videos, posting them to YouTube and garnering huge following. So for example, an Asian one that's been talked about quite recently is Andrew Chicken, like CHIKIN, Cluck Cluck Chicken, but spelled like the millennials and Gen Z like to do it. His videos are no more than 2 minutes at the most, and he's got a 23 million follower base. So think of how you can leverage this type of influencer who is Asian American, has that type of a follower base to be able to deliver your message and to target as well as engage new audiences, especially the ones who are young and upcoming. Okay. There's also been increasing political influence, right? In the last 10 years, there's been a doubling of the representation of Asian Americans in government. But there's still a big gap here, right? Elected officials make up 0.9% of elected leaders, but account for 6%. Wait a minute, I can't remember what you said. 6% of the population. So how are we going to close that gap here, right? And I will say, for me personally, I've been watching how this has played out, and Kamala Harris, seeing her up there as the vice president of this country was amazing to me. When I came to this country, 20-something years ago, I would never have thought that someone like her would have been there. It's no longer, it's no longer a white man's world. And I think while we're trying to push that needle forward in the political stage, it's going to take some time for us to keep shifting that needle forward. So, I think we didn't update this. It should be 1.4 trillion in terms of the buying power. So I'm going to shift a little bit now towards media, because I think Nielsen plays in the space of making sure that we are using and leveraging our role in the media industry to try to drive more diversity, to amplify more voices of underrepresented groups, such as the Asian American audience. With that kind of a buying power, there's also tremendous viewing power, right? In 2022 alone, Asian Americans were watching 1.1 trillion minutes of TV. That's, I don't know where that's coming from, honestly, because I probably watch about, half an hour every day. And most of my media consumption is on my phone. I have to admit that. And it's all through reading and scrolling text more so than actual viewing. I may be giving away my age too. But given what's been going on in our culture with the anti-Asian hate, with the racial reckoning that's been going on, there's been a lot of questions asked, right? So how do we engage? How do we connect better with these different diverse groups in our country today. And when you think about it, right, what I'm feeling, at least as an Asian myself, is that it seems to be either you hear and see people like us in the news when there's been traumatic incidents or moments of crises, or when we do something great big on this award or win out there. And what I personally would like to see is actually something that's more of an ongoing basis, right? So to the left are just some examples of what's been the repercussions of the API hate crimes that's been happening over the last couple of years. There's a little bit of an example here from California where they've actually proposed a lot of bills to require large businesses as well as public transport operators to protect Asians and to come up with very concrete steps to make sure that Asian Americans are not being targeted, especially the elderly. And then on the right side here, you'll see in terms of our cultural moments of triumph, right? Everything, everywhere, all at once. I think, that was really a big night for Asian Americans all around to see this wonderful group on stage, especially Ke Huy Quan, right? With his story of coming to America on a boat. And now he's won an Oscar. I mean, talk about a dream come true there. And then in Las Vegas, just last week, there was the first Korean music festival. K-pop, K-culture, K-beauty, right? That is something that's been taking America by storm from a cultural standpoint. And that is showing up in the fact that this particular music fest happened. And we can't forget our South Asian brothers, sisters as well. They've been a big presence in terms of the books they're writing, the media that's coming out here. CPIX, which is actually a South Asian focused streaming platform, has launched just last year, actually, to cater to that group that really hasn't been catered for. And South by Southwest, if I think many of you are already familiar with them, but they're a big culture and creativity festival that takes place in March every year. They had the first South Asian house there where they featured and focused and spotlighted many of the players within the cultural and creative industries. So understanding the tremendous influence and the tremendous reach and the potential power of the Asian American community, how then can you connect with this population, right? So when I talk about content, it's in terms of messaging, in terms of the kind of shows or programs, or even down to podcasts that you're tapping into, as well as media platforms such as radio, audio, streaming, TV, and digital platforms like social media. So Nielsen TV measurement, we discovered that Asian Americans are the biggest streamers in this country. We consume 27% more streaming than the general population. And this is actually tremendously significant because, yes, there's a tremendous amount of content out there. And actually last fall, in all of the US, right, streaming has overtaken the traditional channels of broadcast TV as well as cable channels. But Asian Americans are leading the way more so in streaming. And then we have to think about that, like, why is that the case? So we're digging a little deeper here into what that the streaming section is focused on. So the circle chart on the left shows streaming compared to broadcast, cable, and other platforms. And the right bar chart shows the breakdown of streaming and digital platforms that make up that additional, the 43% that is spent by Asians on TV. So as you can see, YouTube is the #1 platform. And if you compare it to the other big channels that you might be familiar with, like Netflix, Hulu, Amazon, right? YouTube has a lot of user-generated content. And that means that there is more opportunity for the tremendous cross-cultures, cross-peoples within the Asian American community to discover content that they like, see people that they might be familiar with. The third bucket that says other streaming, right? This is probably something to do with native language programming. I'm going to admit and say that frequently that sample is too small for Nielsen to count, but that's why there's this group bucket of other streaming, and many of which are those in-language and native platforms that are coming from, Korea, Japan, India, that are coming from those different areas of the world where Asians originate from. And we can't forget podcasts, right? Especially throughout the pandemic, we found tremendous double-digit growth for all populations within the US. For Asians, especially though, this is the biggest, fastest growth of for podcasting, 56% since 2019. And if you think about it, right? I don't know, I'm not a big podcast consumer, but a lot of the radio that I listen to on my Alexa at home, right, is actually also on podcasts. So I count myself as a podcaster as well. And it's just nice to have that voice that is coming to you that's familiar. And frequently, there are also a lot of Asian American entrepreneurs who are tapping into this platform because, again, many of these podcasts are user generated. So I met a young, she's probably no more than 20 something. She's Asian American, born and raised here, but she speaks fluent Mandarin. So she's got a podcast that is in Mandarin because she said that she wanted to start something that would help tie her peers of her age group back to their culture. So she uses that podcast to tell stories about her parents, her grandparents, what all the other peers within her group are doing that tap into their cultural heritage. So there's a couple of stories in her podcast that talk about young entrepreneurs who are bringing sauces that their mothers had taught them how to cook at home, and releasing them on Amazon, for example, for sale. So these types of stories fall under the society and culture bucket, as you can see here. These 5 different genres are the ones that Asian Americans tend to listen to more than the general US population. So there's definitely an opportunity here for an organization like the Smithsonian to play into society and culture, right? And I mean, I would argue also tech and science as well. But if you are not thinking about podcasting, this is definitely a platform that you should be looking at. In addition to podcasting, right, digital platforms are definitely another area where the Asian population is over-indexing and consuming much more of compared to other adults in the US. And this chart shows you an example of the top platforms. The red percentage is the percentage of the audience that's reached within the Asian population compared to the numbers that are in the light gray bubble, which is what the adults in the US population stand at. So Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, Discord, those are some of the key ones. And then TikTok in particular, there's been a big boom on that front. And even the short content, the short form content, the attention span of people just isn't there anymore. And the shorter the format, the better it is in terms of reaching and engaging somebody at that touch point. But we've also found that frequently there's a lot of reach. You can use that short form content to spark interest, but it can lead to further deeper exploration of other more expanded content areas. So one of our recent attitudes towards representation in media surveys says that Asian Americans are the most likely to use digital media platforms, social media platforms, to explore what to buy, right, when they're shopping for things. So instead of just going to Amazon and seeing, like, doing a search, they'll go onto Facebook or Yelp or Instagram to see if there's any influencers out there who are also wearing the same shoes, or whether they like the taste of that particular instant noodle more than the other. I don't know about you, but my daughter is a big instant noodle eater, and she's into like the cool, more expensive ones. It's no longer 10-cent top ramen from your local grocery store. So yes, she does does her research on TikTok. Go forth, have peace. And then, I think the other thing also, when you know that streaming is one where the Asian audience gravitates to, and that digital media is also one where the Asian American gravitates to, I can't help but dig deeper as well, right? Like, why is that the case? And when we look at some of these facts, we realize that it's because it feels empowering. There's greater choice, and there's greater accessibility to people who look like us, who are familiar to us. When it comes to news consumption, right, 12% of Asians are more likely to agree that they are getting most of their news through social media platforms. And that there's a tremendous use of these news platforms to seek out international news. Again, there's a desire to stay connected to home countries and cultural roots. and 28% more likely than the general population to do that. And then when it comes to some of the other uses of digital media, right? Asians are 19% more likely to spend a lot of time playing video games, electronic games. And I can definitely attest to this. And 7% more likely also compared to the general population to select what I watch through internet streaming services. So there's definitely an over indexing, as in there's more Asian homes with these streaming services than there are other populations in the US. So besides the platforms and the channels through which we are consuming the media, what is it about the content, right? The stories or the programs that draws the Asian viewer? So in a recent survey, we asked that question, that what is engaging you? What is it that you like that makes you want to watch more of it? Essentially, it's places and faces, right? If it's a geographic location that's familiar for me, so like I'm from Singapore, and if I see something about our newly moved Jurong Bird Park, they're moving from one location where they've been for as long as I've known to a different location that's going to be in the center of the island. I'm going to go check it out. What's going on there, right? And if it's featuring a cast member closely associated with my identity group. So I identify more as Southeast Asian than any other Asian group, right? But so Michelle Yeoh has always been a big favorite of mine. But, it's like, okay, she was last seen in Crazy Rich Asian as this Empress Dowager matriarch, right? And then she was James Bond's sidekick for a while. And now she's truly found her place playing that mother immigrant, as well as a superheroine, I would say, in Everything Everywhere All at Once. But knowing her and my familiarity with her definitely draws me to any future program. So there's 2 programs that she's going to be releasing on streaming later this year, and I'm definitely going to be watching that. And speaking of that, these are just some examples of the increasing number of Asian inclusive programs. And by Asian inclusive, I mean shows that have someone who is a cast member who is Asian on screen. So there's always been a lot of conversation around this, right? And when you talk to a lot of, actually there's an interview from Michelle Yeoh as well, who said that she's come across many scripts, and the script from Everything Everywhere All at Once was the one that was especially poignant to her, because it really defined and met how she defines herself. She's not just the superheroine, kung fu heroine, or that matriarch person that she played in Crazy Rich Asians. That role as somebody who's an Asian immigrant, as a mother, someone who's worrying about her aging parents, how to manage a business, that was something that she really saw all aspects of her being portrayed, and she would have the opportunity to portray all of those parts of her identity. And those scripts don't come to Asian Americans very frequently. Another comment that someone else made was, all right, in Beef, right, which is the current show that's on Netflix with Ali Wong, she said, this is just a regular show about the regular people and the stuff that's going on in their daily life. They're driving through a parking lot and someone flips them off. That happens to all of us. But it's also a show where it's got a majority Asian cast, and I'm no longer referred to as the one who's the Asian one. So the normalization of Asian presence is something that that Asian American audiences are looking for and gravitating to. So these are some of the top programs that have been listed in Nielsen's top streaming shows. The Company You Keep is on ABC, but these shows also come few and far between. Squid Game in 2021 was the #1 show for the entire US population. So there's additional power there in that not only was it attracting Asian American audiences, it was also attracting all audiences. And I want to say that I loved it. I honestly was a little bit afraid of watching it, hearing about the violence that's in it, but I couldn't stop watching it because the stories and the connections and the relationships within between the gamers, right, was just so touching and something that I think any one of us could relate to. So knowing that there's been this demand from Asians for programming that is inclusive of Asian actors, actresses, as well as the experiences that we have, what does representation on screen look like today? So Nielsen has a tool that measures the representation of 60 overt identity groups within the top most watched programs in the US. And here's how it breaks out. So the blue bar is a total Asian Pacific Islander group. And then we are also able to dig deeper into those 4 additional groups you see here: East Asian, South Asian, Southeast Asian, and the NHPI, Native Hawaiian Pacific Islander community. As you can see, streaming is where the highest representation is. And so small wonder that it's where Asians are watching most of their TV, right? There's more opportunity to see people who are familiar and to see stories that are more familiar. There's definitely an opportunity here for South Asians, right? And this is kind of interesting because I was talking to another friend of mine who is South Asian, and she said, there's so many of us who have, immigrated over. Remember, it was the number 2 source of immigration, right, in this country. Yet, look at the low representation of South Asians here on screen. So Never Have I Ever, right, which was one of the top Netflix programs that's been now into the 3rd season, and I think a 4th one is coming out. That was something that was big because they realized that this is something that is, this is a story that is really resonating with people, and there's enough of a population here that we need to engage and we need to continue it. So from a media representation standpoint, from an advertising standpoint, understanding where the representation is in the content, right, where you're putting your products or putting your ads or putting your information about the Institute is also an important aspect of making sure the word is getting out to the right audiences and the message is being delivered by the right groups that feel familiar and that are engaging to Asians. So who here binges TV? So Nielsen also started, again, right, another way to try to value the content that is coming out on streaming. And bingeability is something that we started last year, which basically measures the number of times, number of episodes of that one program is being watched by you, the audience, during any given day. And basically anything that has a bingeability score of 3 or higher is considered highly bingeable. So we went through and selected a few programs that have high ANHPI, which is Asian American, Native Hawaiian, Pacific Islander, share screen. So the representation is high, okay? And then we took a look at how bingeable they were. And as you can see here, where there is high share of screen, where there's high representation of Asians on screen, those shows are also bingeable. And they're bingeable by not just Asians, but the bingeability score, we haven't found a way yet to break it down into the different populations, but this is general bingeability by all audiences. So The Summer I Turned Pretty, I have to admit, I haven't watched that one, but this actress, is relatively unknown, and yet her show was highly bingeable and has this really high share of screen. So again, this is a call to really explore what content is out there that you can align with, and make sure that the stories that you are aligning with are also something that is resonating and engaging. So that's the content where there is Asian representation, right? And that's where mostly in streaming, and that's where most Asians are gravitating to. But we also wanted to look into what the rest of America is watching. Because yes, media has a potential to influence perceptions, break bias, break stereotypes, but also help us who are with that identity group define who we are and what we can or should be, right? But looking across what all of America is watching, they're still mostly watching shows that are on, as you can see in the leftmost column here, these are shows that are mostly on broadcast or cable. And they're mostly police procedurals and medical shows, weirdly enough. But in 2021, right, we found, in 2022, we found that there was about half of the shows had Asian representation. And there's been some progress there, because in 2020, there was 0 Asian representation in these top 10 most watched shows in the US. So think about that too, right? If you never see an Asian person, how are you going to know, like, what's an Asian really like? Who are they? Unless you have friends of your own, of course. And then if you think about this, the parts of the US where you don't see a lot of Asians, what you're watching on TV is probably the closest thing you can come to in terms of understanding what the Asian American population is like. So it's one thing to know how much share screen the Asian actor or actresses have, but there's also another important aspect: what kind of stories are being told, right? Who falls in love? Who gets to be the kicker analyst? Who gets to be the one that comes in and helps out the neighbor that has fallen down the stairs, right? All of that's also an important part of shaping people's perceptions of who you are. So as you can see here, right, there's a lot of different aspects of the themes that are seen when the different Asian groups are seen on screen. Now, when we started this tool about 3 years ago, there were very typical like model minority themes such as doctors, intense, smart, and analytics. Those were some of the themes that were emerging. As you can see now, there's more of a mix of the types of personalities. So the personal relationships, confident, creative, right? That's not something that you see a lot of when it comes to, especially when you think about the top 10 shows with police procedurals. There's no opportunity to showcase creativity. So understanding that this is still a challenge, right? When you think about it, the number that you see in the blue box here was also based on another survey we did. More than half of Asians feel that the on-screen portrayal of our identity group is inaccurate. So there's definitely a gap there that we can still, we still need to help close. So I wanted to just give a nutshell of kind of the highlights that we've got here from an audience standpoint, right? 79% are more likely to feel, of Asians are more likely to feel that they're underrepresented. Twice more likely to feel that representation is inaccurate. Yet they're also 46% more likely to buy from brands who advertise in content that is inclusive of them. So there's tremendous opportunity here when you think of that buying power, that size of population, as well as the fast growth of both of those things. And this is a huge untapped opportunity that I think, even as beyond just the marketers, brands, and the businesses out there, like institutes such as yourselves, needs to think about as well. Like basically, this is saying that you need to, if you want to reach and engage the Asian American audience, you need to make sure that the platforms and the content are representative, not just from a person and how many times they're seen on screen, but also from a storytelling and narrative standpoint. So this is my money slide. Just wanted to drill down a little bit, and thank you, Adam, for giving us that advice after seeing the African American presentation in February, right? What does this mean for an organization like the Smithsonian, right, and the museums that you represent here? We've got a database where we continuously survey the US population, and we're able to break them down into ethnicities as well. And there's two aspects here that I want to just point out, right? In a travel and leisure situation, we found that Asian American consumers are more likely to want to be immersed in the local culture when they are out traveling. So and the blue numbers are basically more than 12%, 12% more likely than the total US population to want to immerse themselves in local culture, as well as use social media to show and tell friends about their trips and vacations. That's 22% above, and that should be no surprise given our propensity for digital media platforms and social media platforms. So these are two opportunities here, again, right, to spread the word about what you've got going on, right, inside your institutions, inside your museums, and really showcase that, hey, we know we want to engage with Asian Americans, but Asian Americans can also take that and spread the word about it. And then the other aspect that was really interesting to me was this: we asked the question, in the last 12 months, which of these activities have you been doing, right? So continuing adult education, Asian Americans were more than 25% more likely than the general population to do this. So there's interest, there's appetite to learn more about the world around us, about the stories, the things that you have around you. And this, the red data point, I was just like, woo, go Smithsonian. 91% more likely, Asians are 91% more likely to have visited an art museum. And, one thing I should have started with is my first interaction with the museum was when I was in college doing an internship with the Cole Children's Museum in Chicago. Growing up in Singapore, museums were just, in my head at least, where art hung on walls. There was nobody to walk you through. There was nothing fun. There was nothing interesting. That Children's Museum opened my eyes to the potential of what a museum could be, where it's interactive, where it's fun, where you're really bringing to life what the things, the stories, the collections, even the art that's hanging on the wall. There's a story behind each one of them that helps connect with the experiences, so that it means something to all of us. So there is an opportunity, definitely, given the interest of Asian American populations, to be a part of this, to be in museums, to use what you've got in those walls, as well as the social platforms or any other media outreach that you're doing to engage the Asian American population. So in a nutshell, I hope that you've seen here that representation really matters for the audiences you're trying to reach, perhaps even for the brands you're trying to engage. And it could be, other advocacy community groups, but also remembering that it shouldn't be just about engaging Asian Americans when it's time for crisis, or when it's time for Asian American Heritage Month, right? There's an opportunity to do this on an ongoing basis. There's an opportunity to keep on keeping on, right? And making sure that the stories and the experiences of Asian Americans are showcased, spotlighted, but also shared through the Smithsonian, the institutes, the museums that you've got. So, and that somewhere, between the trauma of anti-Asian hate, as well as the triumph of Oscar wins, right? That you are embracing our community, that means a lot. And that's going to win you fans for life. Yeah. Thank you.
On that note, thank you so much. That was a lot of information. Fantastic. And good to know that 91% of the Asian community, and especially, has visited a museum. It sounds like specifically an art museum, but it's very exciting. And that 25% has taken advantage of educational activities. So with that, I really would love to invite questions. Please use the chat, and let's ask questions of Pat. And Pat, while the questions are starting to come in, one thing that really struck me was, as you were saying, is the faces and places, but really representation. And I wonder if you could just elaborate a little bit more on that, and ways that you think an organization like the Smithsonian can really take advantage of this in order to kind of better engage the Asian American community and the non-Asian American community, but those who are interested in Asian American history and culture.
You mean by representation of with shows and media?
Translate it into the work that happens within the museum sector. Yeah, okay. Love your thoughts there. And please get your questions in.
Yeah, so I'm just going to use an example, right? I don't know how much it costs to engage Andrew Chicken, for example, the YouTube short expert that has 23 million followers, right? But given that that's where Asian Americans are gravitating towards media that is short form, is that something you can think of, right? Are there certain influences who are experts within the specific spaces, that are Asian American, that you can tap into, even for a quick Instagram live that takes about 10, 15 minutes to talk about your upcoming exhibit, for example. Maybe engaging a podcaster, right? I'm thinking about NPR's Reset, for example, right? There's segments of that. For example, they do spotlight the different heritage months. So that's another opportunity to tap into those podcasts that are about and can reach all of America, not just the Asian Americans, to educate people about what you've got going on, but also to share what the exhibits are going to teach people about the Asian American population.
Great. We have a question that came in to me. How might we leverage some of the tools that you,
in order actually to recruit a broader Asian American applicant?
Sorry, are you?
Oh, I'm sorry, did I cut out?
Yeah.
A question that came in was, how might we actually leverage some of the tools that you mentioned in order to recruit a more diverse workforce, specifically Asian Americans, to apply for positions at the Smithsonian?
To apply for positions in the Smithsonian, so for hiring and talent recruiting. Okay. I would say the best ambassadors for your organization are the people who are already in it. So can you hear me? Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Okay, great. We find this is true even within Nielsen, right? We use your typical social media like LinkedIn as well, but we're also experimenting a little bit with Instagram. So this year, for example, we launched a series called I Feel Seen, where we are getting our employees to come and talk about when was the first time they felt seen in media, but also ask them about their experience as a Nielsen employee. What's it like to be an Asian American, an LGBTQ person, a Black person working at Nielsen, for example, right? And we of course we try and get them to. We know that they're happy at Nielsen, right? And we ask them examples. We ask them to share examples of how they felt seen at work. So we've had a plethora of experiences where someone said, "I was chosen for our diverse leadership network." I love doing work, or not doing work, participating in our employee resource groups when we do our, Diwali celebrations, because I get to celebrate my culture, but also teach my colleagues who are not Indian about what it means to celebrate Diwali. There was a Native American person who decided to take the leap and proposed a Native American ERG. So he talked about that experience. So I think social media, especially, and I'm guessing you're talking about recruiting the younger generation here, is definitely a place to go. I would say even at the Gen X level, Facebook is still something that a lot of Asian Americans are tuning into. And that's another place where you can tell those stories. So storytelling is number one, and using your own people as those storytellers who are like the folks you're trying to attract.
So in this case, Nielsen actually turned around and looked at the research, looked at the report, and said, "How do we take advantage of this and ensure that we are telling stories with representation for the audiences we're trying to reach? That it's actually they can see themselves." Literally, to take your example, we have another one here from our colleague Aaron Blasco, asking to expand a little bit on the 22% that you referenced. They're using social to tell their friends about their trips and vacations. And try to elaborate here. Some of the goals of the Smithsonian is really to expand and really help people better understand the visit to the Smithsonian for those who aren't necessarily able to come. So how are ways that we might be able to expand and reach that tourism audience and help share what it's like to visit? And yes, start there, please. Does that make sense?
Yeah, sure. Let me answer this, and just I'm not sure who asked that question, but I hope I'm giving you the correct answer, and feel free to ping back if that's not what you were looking for. So I think I mentioned micro influencers, right? And to us, we define that as people who have a following of 5,000 to 10,000 people. And again, I personally use this myself for our diverse intelligence series, where we've got the data, and that's the problem, right? Nielsen has data that's just kind of numbers on a page, unless you add some color to it. So we ask these micro influencers to talk about, all right, so you say we find that most people are streaming. What are you streaming? What are you watching? Why do you watch it, right? So humanizing the data brings it to life. So if you are trying to tap into how do we bring the Institute's experiences to the people, right, rather than the other way around. Again, I think if you tap into the social influences as well as your own people potentially to share their experiences, that's another powerful way to get the message out. Something else that we've often recommended also is if you've got a new product launch. So for example, this is not a good example because we're a data company, but I'm going to just give an example of a new news item that just came out, right? When we first signed the Crown Act, I'm not sure if you're familiar with that, but it's an act that is trying to get passed in multiple states that basically fights discrimination against Black natural hair. So basically, some of my Black colleagues have talked about how they've had managers who tell them, you got to go home and straighten your hair because what you've got going on with your afro isn't cutting it. Okay. I mean, how horrible is that, right? And we signed into this Crown Act about 5 years ago. And a lot of our own Black employees, went out and promoted that and basically said, this is so great that we're part of a company that actually has come out and taken specific action besides just saying Black Lives Matter. So, trying to bring and empowering your employees, empowering the people who are inside the Institute to take those experiences out, is definitely a big, important thing to do, to try to bring those experiences out to the audiences that you're trying to reach. Another way to do this also is, besides your own employees, we've also had a lot of, excuse me, success in terms of tapping into the community organizations, right? Inviting, let's say, there's an organization called the Asian Hustle Network. So they're a group of Asian young entrepreneurs who are up and coming. So we had them come on to talk about what it means to be an entrepreneur and how they engage new customers within the Asian population. So tapping into those community organizations, they have a lot of energy when it comes to, making sure that they're connecting with the folks who are like them. I hope that answered your question.
Yeah, thank you.
You're welcome.
Thanks, Aaron. Love that answer. This is Aaron saying this. Thanks, Pat. Micro-influencers, examples of real action, leveraging authentic internal voices and connecting with community orgs. So just wanted to echo what Aaron said, and thank you for doing that. I wonder if you can share a little bit more around that, the point that you had from the data that folks are unhappy, or that half of their representation is inaccurate. Just to kind of share not only what that means for the Asian American community, but what can be done, and what is some of the ways that you are seeing examples of how that is changing, and areas where organizations like the Smithsonian and others can make a difference to kind of help change that number, and just tell media why that's not good.
Yeah, it's as simple as looking at, and I will say I learned this as well from developing these reports that we're pushing out, right? We're extremely conscious about making sure that, with the Asian report, for example, it's not just East Asian faces, because I think there's this tendency to think about Chinese or Vietnamese or the fairer skinned people, right? But guess what? There are Muslim Asians, there are South Asian Asians, there are Filipinos who actually look more like Hispanic people in many cases, making sure that all of that is displayed in the materials that you're producing is a very simple first step you can take. I think the other thing also is in terms of representation, when you are going out to, I think I took a look at your Instagram posts, and there wasn't you can look at all the posts in one go and you can see all the little squares, right? There wasn't a lot of diversity, I would have to say. And I know you've got a lot of diversity because you have so many different aspects of museums, and like the African American Museum, and the Asian one is coming up shortly, right? So potentially showcasing that and looking more closely at what is seen when an external audience member is looking at that, so that it's obvious that you are thinking diverse, that you are thinking about people like me, right? Goes a long way as well. I would say that in the last couple of years with the racial reckoning that's been going on, generally speaking, there's been a lot of erosion in trust. I'm not sure if you're familiar with the Edelman Trust Barometer, but it's a publicly available report that's been done now for, I think, almost 10 years. And there's been an erosion in people's trust of institutions. So it's a risk if you're not showing yourself as caring, if you're not showing yourself as trustworthy, right? That we are somebody who cares about you by showing up with representative materials, representative content, representative programming. How are you going to win back those future audiences? How are you going to win future employees, to your question earlier, Aaron? So, I think it's as simple as just making sure that, and it has to go beyond Heritage Months, right? It's not just about, oh, it's Asian Heritage Month, therefore we need to have the Asian Heritage celebration. I think that's a good place to start, but thinking more broadly about how to make sure that that's going on throughout the entire year itself, and weaving in to everyday programming is important.
That's great.
One last thought. I think intersectionality is also important to think about, particularly in the US, because our largest population based on the last US Census was in people who identified themselves as 2 or more mixed races. So we're not just all Asian anymore. There's a lot of, Blasians who are Black and Asian, who are Afro-Latinos, right? It's definitely important to look at that and make sure that there is, when you're planning your next program, right? Even if it's for Asian Heritage Month, is there an aspect of mixed heritage Asians that you can bring into that?
That's great. We have a question here from my colleague, Sam Vong. Has Nielsen asked what kinds of content AANHPI viewers want to see more of?
So, Sam, thanks for asking that question. So I think the data that I shared with you here sort of we use surveys for the most part, right? So you can see where there's an over index where, like for example, with the podcasting, right? You saw like business, culture, tech, society were the ones that Asians were gravitating towards. That's how we look to see what kind of content they're looking for. And the bingeability score as well.
That's great. I have a question. Using Nielsen, how do you leverage your work, your actual position, your work, and this kind of information in order to help Nielsen think about the ways that it thinks about curating its website, content, images, outreach, so that it is representational, that it is diverse, and not just doing it when it's a heritage one? What are some of the conversations that you all have and the strategies that you advise? And I know we don't have a lot of time, so.
Yeah, so I think it depends on how your organizations are set up, right? So the one important thing is to have that leadership engagement from the top to make sure that that inclusion, diversity is part of your overall how you do work, how you run things within the organization. So at Nielsen, our actual values are inclusion, courage, and growth. So inclusion, right? It's there in our values. So that's just a natural part of how we work. The other thing also is by measuring that, right? As part of the year-end reviews, we're expected to provide an answer to how have you helped to drive the Nielsen values for the year. So you've got to show like, all right, yes, this year we, if you're, let's say, a member of the employee resource group, we attended I helped to lead a program about Asians in advertising and how the different brands where our clients have promoted, different products that are specific to Asians, for example, right? And then I think the other aspect of it is, I don't know whether you've got the equivalent of an employee resource group in Smithsonian Museum. So I think tapping into those resource groups to be able to hear the voices and what they need and what they're seeing is really critical. So as an example, we were trying to understand whether there was an influence of behind the scenes crew members on how bingeable content was. We actually tapped into our Asian BRG to help code the 400 lines of data to look up and see, of all the crew members that are listed for this program, how many are actually Asian. There was no correlation, by the way. That's why we didn't release that. But at least we tested the hypothesis and we involved them, and it was in something that was core to our business. So I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, it's great. What else did you all find out by looking in first off, using the community to crowdsource that information is fantastic. But did you find some interesting information about the crews that made up the programs in terms of diversity with regards to not only the quality of content, but what viewership? Is there a correlation?
We did not go down that path. We did not go down that path.
Future studies.
It's future studies, exactly.
Yeah. I think we have time for one more question, or if you have another comment, Pat, either or. Another comment from you, Pat?
I just think that, again, right, like I mentioned, I love museums for all that it can do. And my first exposure to that Cole Children's Museum is just mind-blowing, and I am so honored to be a part of this today. And it's really, museums are a place where the experiences of the people within this country can really come to life. Adding to that, social media and the user-generated content can really take that experiences out of your walls to the people that you're representing. But I think importantly, also educating other people about the groups that you're trying to represent.
Well, that's a perfect way to end this talk. Thank you again, Pat, for this presentation. Everyone who's here, do check out Nielsen and look for this report. It is easily available, as is other information. And we don't have it out there yet, but in September, we will have another presentation on Hispanic audiences and representation in the media from Nielsen. So look for that in the coming months. Thank you again, Pat, and everyone have a great day, and see you hopefully tomorrow.